Hello everyone, I'm Autobot Sonic, the Telltale Gamer, bringing us everything Telltale Games, Transformers, and more. Welcome back to another review of Transformers EarthSpark Season 1. This time we'll be covering Episode 7, Family and Friends. So this episode really marks, in my mind, the end of the setup period of EarthSpark. That this is really the last episode where sort of the status quo of EarthSpark is set up, where if Episode 1 and 2 are about introducing us to the Maltos and Twitch and Thrash, Episode 3 was about Bumblebee, Episode 4 and Episodes 4 and 6 were all about Twitch and Thrash, Episode 5 was Ghost. Now, Episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10 are just sort of more self-contained stories that just sort of further expand upon the world of EarthSpark, while also telling individual stories. This is the last, truly, I feel like, filler episode, though Episode 8 actually is kind of a filler episode as well, but it does seem to have big implications for later on, but we'll get to that review next week. So this time, though, we're going to be just sticking to Episode 7, and in my opinion, it's a good episode, but definitely, in my opinion, the second weakest episode of this batch. Not as weak as Classified was, but still not to the same degree as several other episodes were, especially hot off the heels of its last one, Traditions. So we're going to go ahead and see everything this episode did right and what it did wrong. So this episode starts off with Bumblebee running a training course with Twitch and Thrash, essentially having them run back and forth between different parts of the barn. However, as we can see, Twitch and Thrash seem exhausted and just out of it completely, which Bumblebee's confused by, considering that they've just started training, and Twitch and Thrash basically explain that they're feeling weird because of Robbie and Mo, and that they feel really stressed out but also exhausted at the same time. And as we learn from Robbie and Mo, who are inside the main house with Dot, it's apparently their first day of school, and they're obviously really nervous about it, Mo especially, but Robbie tries to play it cool and assures Mo that everything's gonna be alright. So as Mo and Robbie head out the house with Dot to go say goodbye to Twitch and Thrash before they leave for school, Twitch and Thrash head up to them and they sort of just explain to them what school is, and when they find out that they can't go with them, they start to become a little bit concerned, thinking that perhaps Robbie and Mo are gonna forget about them and just make new friends at school without having to ever come back to them at all. And that sort of causes Twitch and Thrash to freak out even more, Thrash especially, who just ends up, for some reason, randomly transforming and starts driving out of control all over the barn, nearly running over Alex, who comes out of the house with lunches for Robbie and Mo, but thankfully Thrash is able to transform out of it before he runs over Alex. So after Thrash transforms back before he runs over Alex, he explains to him, Dot, and the rest of the Maltos that just how weird he's feeling, that he seems, for some reason or another, he can't really transform or control when he transforms for some reason. And despite this, though, Robbie and Mo say that they need to go off to school, and while Twitch and Thrash try to reason with them to come with them, Robbie and Mo explain that they can't because they need to stay home with the barn, otherwise they'll be outed as Terrans and that Ghost will come and take them away. So they just need to get used to Robbie and Mo doing their own things occasionally, with school just being one of them that they just can't happen to go to. Not because they don't want them to, but they just have to. So Robbie and Mo arrive at school, and they end up being put together in a class together with their teacher, Mr. Smelt, who is apparently Witwiki's drama school teacher that also happens to teach music and other stuff at the same time. I think it's a music class, considering he's making Robbie and Mo sing later on this episode. The interesting thing, though, is Mr. Smelt is honestly a hilarious character, and that's only further strengthened by his voice actor. So for anyone who doesn't recognize Mr. Smelt's voice immediately, he is voiced by none other than Darren Norris, aka the original voice of Knockout back from Transformers Prime. And honestly, when I noticed this at first, I find it absolutely hilarious that literally Mr. Smelt's personality, his character, it literally is if Knockout was a human. That's literally all I can imagine it being. That he's got Knockout's dramatics. Darren Norris voices him exactly like he voices Knockout too, and it's just hilarious. The only thing is, though, everyone's been just roasting Mr. Smelt on Twitter, I've seen, just because of how ugly he looks in comparison to Knockout. I think that might be intentional on the EarthSpark team, that they got Darren Norris, who's regarded by many to be one of the sexiest Transformers in the entire franchise, to play such a basic human like Mr. Smelt. I think that's honestly, it's a funny thing, and though it is kind of disappointing that really they waste Darren Norris on a joke character per se, because I really want to see him be a more major character in this show. Unfortunately, this is the only episode he shows up in, But who knows, maybe in later episodes, Mr. Smelt will become a much larger character, but I don't hold him hopes up. But it is cool, though, to see Darren Norris return for another Transformers show. Even though I would love to see him voice Knockout again, it is cool that we have him in at least in some capacity in another Transformers show. So basically, Mo ends up being put into the same class as Robbie because, according to Mr. Smelt, her teacher is out for the day, which I don't understand how a 9-year-old gets put in with the same class as a bunch of 13-year-olds, but you do you, Witwicky Charter School, you do you. But anyways, the class goes on. Mr. Smelt clearly gets on Robbie and Mo's nerves, so while Twitch and Thrash are back at the Malta homestead being taught more or less scouting lessons by Bumblebee, we can see that they sort of pick up on Robbie and Mo's frustration, which distracts them from their training. So B decides to take things into his own hands and essentially sort of put their worries about Robbie and Mo at ease by going on a a small recon mission of their own to basically eavesdrop on Robbie and Mo at school while staying hidden. So B, Twitch, and Thrash arrive outside at the parking lot of the school where they're spying on Robbie and Mo in class with Mr. Smelt and a bunch of other kids. So it's at this point where Mr. Smelt goes out for a break to check his dating app, apparently, and he notices Bumblebee parked in his alt mode in the, I think it's the senior parking lot or the faculty parking lot. So Mr. Smelt goes to get the principal for some reason to run him out, thinking it's just some senior who's just pulling a senior prank or something. Bumblebee decides to go leave and tells Twitch and Thrash to meet him back up there. However, Twitch and Thrash are still fully intent on spying on Robbie and Mo and seeing how they're handling their first day of class. So Twitch decides to try and transform into her drone mode to try and get a better view of their classroom, which is on the second or third floor of the school. But just like Thrash did at the beginning of this episode, Twitch has trouble figuring out how to transform. Eventually, though, she does manage to force it. Though, when she watches Robbie and Mo being forced to practice singing by Mr. Smelt, Twitch ends up malfunctioning. That for some reason causes Mo to actually start replicating her erratic movements, where Twitch is bumping into the wall of the school. Mo is just spinning around in the classroom, and then while Thrash jumps up to try and stop her and calm Twitch down, Robbie ends up replicating Thrash's movements and does what he does. Now, to me, this is a bit confusing because in previous episodes, it was always sort of elaborated on that Twitch had a more deeper connection with Robbie and Thrash had a more deeper connection with Mo. So wouldn't Mo be replicating Thrash's movements and Robbie be replicating Twitch's? That kind of confuses me, that Twitch is linked to Mo here instead of Robbie, and Thrash is linked to Robbie instead of Mo. That just seems a little bit odd. And while all the kids in class seem to laugh at Robbie and Mo for just humiliating themselves in the class, and while they feel really embarrassed about it, turns out it's not actually all that bad, as two other kids in the classes, especially this one kid, Bruno, seem to be impressed by just how much of a spectacle they're putting on in class and think they're alright. So he invites Robbie and Mo to a pool party that he's having at his house later on after school that day. So eventually the class ends and Robbie and Mo head out to head back to meet up with Twitch and Thrash and go back to home. And he notices that Twitch and Thrash are there and asks them why they ended up freaking out in the classroom. And Twitch and Thrash try to explain that they too are just glitching out for no reason, and this causes Robbie to get a little bit snippy with Twitch and Thrash, basically saying that he didn't want them coming because he knew something like this would happen and it would humiliate them. So he says to just go home and wait at home until they're ready to come home. And while Robbie storms off, presumably to head to the pool party or just go home with Mo, Mo stays behind a bit to basically sort of make it more of a smoother talk to Twitch and Thrash, basically saying that the first day of school is really important to her and Robbie, and that sometimes there's just going to be some things that Twitch and Thrash just can't be involved in. So they leave, heading home, presumably hoping that Twitch and Thrash will be right behind them, but Twitch and Thrash are absolutely devastated by this, thinking that Robbie and Mo already don't want them in their new lives, and that thinking that they're having more fun at school than they are with Robbie and Mo. So eventually Twitch decides to go off on her own for some reason, and Thrash ends up following her, with both of them being significantly drained looking like in their to some degree. So Robbie and Mo get back to see B to clean up from their training exercises that they were doing earlier on in the day, and basically tell B about how their first day went and how they got invited to the pool party with Bruno and a bunch of other kids. And so B's happy for them that they're making friends at school. He also reminds them to not forget about Twitch and Thrash because they really care about them and were really nervous about making sure that they weren't forgotten about just because they have new friends. And while it seems as though at first that Mo and Robbie don't really seem too concerned about it, considering they can't really feel anything, like any sadness or disappointment from Twitch and Thrash, Mo sort of second guesses on this, basically saying that she and Robbie can make friends whenever they want, but Twitch and Thrash are family and that they come first before any potential friends that they need. And so it's at this point that Robbie and Mo have to go and find Twitch and Thrash, but as we said earlier, neither Robbie nor Mo can really figure out where they are based on their cybersleep connection. So B offers to find them, to help them track Twitch and Thrash by following a bunch of footprints that are laid out throughout the woods of Witwiki in an attempt to find them. Now, while this is happening, B tries to give more scouting lessons to Robbie and Mo, and they just sort of kind of make this into a lesson as they're following these trails to try and find Twitch and Thrash. And it's at this point, like, it just feels like a lot of dead air at this point. It just feels pretty boring, in my opinion, having just B basically just fill up this dead space. There's this one moment where B clears a big log out of the way for Robbie and Mo to get through, only to find out a raccoon was living in there, and that sort of scares him to the point where he falls off a cliff, though he and the raccoon are both fine. I mean, like, yeah, it's harmless fun, but it just feels boring in my opinion, and just makes the time run longer than it should. So it's at this point where they end up finding Thrash resting against a tree with no sign of Twitch, and Thrash just looks heavily drained, like, and exhausted, which Bumblebee scans him, realizing that his energon levels are low. So he gives him like this little energon patch. He just slaps on his chest and he absorbs it to make it hoping that it will keep his energon levels at like a succinct level until they can properly refuel him and Twitch when they get back home. Though Thrash just ignores B and the rest of and Robbie and Mo, and just ends up walking off like a zombie deeper into the woods, presumably to find Twitch. It's at this point that B essentially explains what's happening to Twitch and Thrash to Robbie and Mo, that they're experiencing very short energon shortage, and that if they don't get into it soon, any energon for them soon, they're gonna go into a comatose state where they basically essentially be dead until they're able to get energon into them, and that it can have very nasty side effects on a Cybertronian if they become low on energon, which Bumblebee ends up telling a very dark story to Robbie and Mo. Basically, he plays it off as a joke, saying that Soundwave was low on energon one time, trying to transform or eject one of his cassettes, like Rumble or Ravage or Frenzy, only to say that the cassette exploded in his chest when he was low on energon, and Robbie and Mo are just traumatized by this, clearly. And to me, keep this in mind for episode 8, because I'm just gonna say this right now, episode 8 does feature Soundwave, and a certain distinct one of his cassette tapes is missing from the lineup in that episode. So is this implying that one of Soundwave's cassettes was literally killed when Soundwave went on was low on energon at some point during the war? Is that what this is implying, that Bumblebee is making fun of a cassette tape's death? Now, a lot of people on Twitter were actually, like, up in arms about this, because they're thinking, oh, why is Bumblebee making jokes about a cassette's death? Like, that's so not like Bumblebee. Now, keep in mind, though, these are Autobots, Decepticons. They do have some sort of animosity towards each other, so I don't think it's that too deep, but it is interesting to see that Bumblebee seems to take a death so lighthearted. I mean, granted, it is a Decepticon to him, but still, it just seems so crazy that Bumblebee is seemingly joking about what is potentially be another Decepticon's death. And that's going to be something that really plays into next episode, which I'm really excited to talk about. Despite that, though, Robbie and Mo implore B to keep searching for Twitch and Thrash, and they end up catching up to them, where they're essentially, for some reason, just looking totally brain dead, with Twitch repeatedly shooting at the ground underneath her, and Thrash is right next to her, punching the ground, like ripping up the dirt, trying to get to something. And Robbie and Mo try to call out to them, only to have Twitch turn around and actually shoot at them, but B thankfully manages to pull them out of the way of the fire, which ends up instead destroying a large tree that falls down and basically breaks the whole ground beneath them, causing Twitch, Thrash, Robbie, Mo, and B all to fall down into this cave. Everyone falls into the cave, but Robbie and Mo are okay because B basically broke their fall on him. And so as they get up from the cave, they realize that they're in a cave very similar to the one that they actually found the stone that gave birth to Twitch and Thrash, but it's got the same sort of blue glowy cave water that one had. As they get up from Bumblebee and look around the cave, they actually see Twitch and Thrash, now comatose and presumably out of energon, just laying dead in the water. And so at this point, Robbie and Mo are totally freaking out, thinking that Twitch and Thrash are dead and desperately trying to revive them. And Bumblebee's totally confused by this, considering that he just gave energon to Thrash, and yet he's still in a comatose state, so he doesn't understand why. So he tries to figure out a way out for them all, while also hoping to try and get some more energon or whatever to revive Twitch and Thrash. And so as Robbie and Mo beg Twitch and Thrash to wake up, suddenly some cave water drips off the ceiling of the cave and onto Twitch's face, which actually ends up getting absorbed by her, and that's where the big reveal of this comes in. So the water actually ends up being absorbed by Twitch and Thrash and revives them, making them feel totally normal again. It's at this point where Robbie, Mo, and Bumblebee all realize that since they're Terrans, they don't exactly run on energon. They actually run off this special cave water that is found in here. So Robbie and Mo realize that this is essentially where they can go to refuel whenever they can, because they've never actually gotten any refuel of this water since they were born back in episode 1. And that basically explains that they're going to be going here constantly to refuel whenever they need to. So now they're newly re-energized. Twitch and Thrash carry Robbie and Mo out of the cave, but not before Bumblebee actually shows them some weird cave drawings that he explains are an ancient Cybertronian. Now, unfortunately for me, I can't read ancient Cybertronian, but a lot of people on Twitter can, so I'll go ahead and read the translation here, which states, "In times of need, help shall rise to your call." So this phrase is actually really important and plays a lot into basically foreshadowing what's going to happen in episode 9, but again, I'll talk about that later on when we get to my episode 9 and 10 review. What I will talk about, though, is the insignia of a certain character that is in this message, and that is of Quintus Prime. Now, for any of you fans of the IDW comics or Transformers Prime, Quintus Prime was one of the original 13 Primes who was essentially in charge of creating new life on other planets besides Cybertron. Now, back in the Prime continuity, he had an object called the Ember Stone that he took with him off-world to go and try and bring new life to other planets. Now, I wonder if that stone that gave birth to Twitch and Thrash is maybe this universe's version of the Ember Stone? Just maybe? I don't know, but we'll find out in episode 9, that's for sure. Another thing, though, interesting thing, though, is actually if we go back to the credits for episode 1 of EarthSpark, you can actually see that Quintus Prime was credited as the mysterious voice inside the cave that Robbie and Mo found the Ember Stone in. And turns out Quintus Prime is voiced by none other than Clancy Brown, who many Transformers fans will recognize previously voiced Silas back in Transformers Prime, who was the leader of Mech and who ended up taking over Breakdown's body after he was killed by Arachnid. Clancy Brown has also done a lot of other stuff in other cartoons and TV shows and games. You may recognize him, of course, most famously as the voice of Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob, Lex Luthor in a bunch of DC properties, or even Hank in Detroit Become Human. So the fact that Quintus Prime is in this, we've got 2 Transformers Prime veterans now in the show. We got Clancy Brown, who played Silas as Quintus Prime, and we've got Darren Norris, who played Knockout here as Mr. Smelt. And it's just really cool to see old Transformers Prime voice actors come back for EarthSpark. But anyway, after that, Twitch and Thrash get Robbie and Mo out of the cave alongside B, and where B explains to them that essentially that Robbie and Mo gave up going to the pool party to go and try and find Twitch and Thrash and make sure they were okay, which Twitch and Thrash are touched by, but they also feel kind of guilty that they missed out on the pool party because of them. And so while Robbie and Mo don't seem too upset about it, Twitch and Thrash insist on taking him to the party anyway because they feel like that Robbie was right in the beginning and that they need to learn to be okay with Robbie and Mo doing human stuff without them just as much as Twitch and Thrash they need to be okay with Twitch and Thrash doing more Terran stuff that they can't do. So the episode ends on a pretty happy note there, with Robbie and Mo being taken by Twitch and Thrash to the pool party while B just heads back to the Malta homestead on his own. It's a cute episode that explains more so what is going on with the Terrans, and I think that's really cool. But it was kind of just a boring filler episode too. It doesn't really have too many stakes, and that's where the cons come in. And so that was my review of Transformers EarthSpark Season 1, Episode 8, Family and Friends. If I had to rate this episode, I'd probably give it a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. Definitely not as bad as Classified, but it still was just, it wasn't a bad episode, it was just a boring episode, in my opinion, for the most part. I do like the concept of the Terrans not running off of Energon and running on this cave water. I think that's a cool concept, and it does give some pretty cool foreshadowing to later on these 10 episodes. And I think Mr. Smelt is a hilarious character. Granted, he's not really important to the whole larger EarthSpark story, but I think Darren Norris does a great job of him. However, the cons come in the form of the fact that Bruno and the rest of the kids at Robbie Moe's class are pretty forgettable. The conflict just is really weak in my opinion, and the whole bit with Robbie and Moe and Bee tracking down Twitch and Thrash is just really boring in my opinion, and it's more boring often than it's not, but it does have some pretty cool things in it that I did like. So that's going to be this review, though. I'll be back soon, though, with Episode 8, Decoy, which I'm sure is an episode that's going to be many fans' favorite. If you like this review, just like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later.